U.S. defense officials and NATO are warning that Russian forces appear to be regrouping for more attacks in Ukraine. It comes as the Kremlin pushes back against suggestions President Putin is isolating himself and being misled about the war. CBS News' Debra Alfarone has the latest.
The Pentagon says Ukrainian forces are on the attack near the capital, Kyiv, and other cities despite ongoing Russian airstrikes. U.S. and NATO officials warn Russia's military is preparing to execute more attacks.
There is no clear evidence that he's pulling all of his forces out of Kyiv. There is also evidence that he is beefing up his troops down in the Donbass area.
A bus convoy makes its way towards the battered city of Mariupol to evacuate civilians and deliver humanitarian supplies after the Red Cross said Russia agreed to a safe corridor.
People are living in sheer terror.
The United Nations Human Rights Council says it's investigating whether Ukrainian civilians are being forcefully moved to Russia or Russia-controlled territories.
When some of these parents are killed by the Russians, the children are sent to Russia. I think we should get more evidence and documentation about that.
The Biden administration slapped new sanctions on dozens of Russian tech companies and networks that could be used to evade existing sanctions. Meanwhile, Moscow disputes U.S. warnings that Russian President Vladimir Putin is being misled on how poorly his military is performing.
I'm not saying this with a certainty. He seems to be self-isolating. And there's some indication that he has fired or put under house arrest some of his advisors.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed Dutch and Belgian lawmakers, repeating calls for a no-fly zone and more weapons in. Debra Alfarone, CBS News, the White House.
CBS News chief foreign affairs correspondent and moderator of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, joins me now. Margaret, thanks so much for being with us. What impact will the president's emergency release of oil from the SPR actually have on gas prices at the pump?
Well, even the president said, Robert, that he's not entirely sure. He put a ballpark range of a difference of 10 to 35 cents per gallon. But as he acknowledged, this is really up to market forces. And he also said that he hopes other countries, other allied countries of the United States, agree to take emergency measures and put more barrels of oil onto the market. Now, obviously, crude oil and what you put in your gasoline tank are two completely different products, but they are interlinked in terms of pricing. But this is ultimately the president acknowledging the very real pain Americans are feeling. He labeled it the Putin price hike. Now, prices have spiked on the market since the Russian invasion and even prior to it, given the concerns about the buildup. But let's be clear here. Inflation has been at a 40-year high since before this time. And that's not just with gas. It's food. It's consumer goods. Gasoline itself is 47% higher than it was a year ago. So the president, in addressing this issue, is talking about something that could have a political cost for him and fellow Democrats, as much as a very real impact for how people experience the economy. So that's where all of these geopolitical issues really have the dots connected back to everyday Americans.
And there's a real impact on everyday people in France and Germany. Speaking of U.S. allies, they are refusing Russia's demands to pay for gas deliveries in Russian rubles. Which side holds more cards in this equation?
Well, Vladimir Putin is playing one of the strongest hands he has, and that is the fact that Europe is reliant on his country for about 40% of their gas supply. And that's still the case, even though we're talking about, you know, this punishing sanctions regime that the West largely has leveraged on Russia. The contracts that many of these European countries like Germany have continue to operate. And so that Russian gasoline is still flowing into Europe. That's why Putin's threat here is so unique. He is so interwoven into the economy, particularly of countries like Germany. The chancellor there, Olaf Scholz, made clear today that he would continue to pay in euros because that's what the longstanding contract stipulates, dollars or euros. The reason Vladimir Putin cares about the currency is because he's trying to prop up the ruble, and that currency has been dramatically punished by the sanctions regime, and he is trying to use what leverage he has here. It's really unclear how this will get resolved, but for now, Europe is remaining united in saying they will only go ahead with the contracts as written, and they won't break their own sanctions.
Margaret, let's turn to the war itself. What's your reporting telling us about what we're learning about this war? The Department of Defense said today that its assessment is Russia's invasion was planned with a small number of advisors close to Putin. DoD said it does not think they were honest with him. The president said this.
I'm not saying this with a certainty. He seems to be self-isolated, and there's some indication that he has fired or put under house arrest some of his advisors. But I don't want to put too much stock in that at this time because we don't have that much hard evidence.
Margaret, why the disconnect?
Well, the president's just using different language than the Pentagon here, and really what he's doing is reflecting that it's an intelligence assessment. The United States, with this analysis, is really trying to get inside a very small room with a very small number of people, and is very careful typically when it describes the level of access it has to that inner circle in the Kremlin. What I have been told is that there were only about 12 or so people who were part of the planning, along with Vladimir Putin, of this invasion. And in fact, you've seen the consequences of keeping that circle so small. That, in fact, even with how the sanctions have hit the Russian economy is a reflection of that. For example, some of their central bankers who would have been key to clue in early on were not aware. And so, therefore, some of these emergency cash reserves, for example, were left vulnerable. So Vladimir Putin, by relying on a tighter and tighter circle, may have left himself or his country more vulnerable in some ways to the actions the United States and the West has taken. But it was a choice by the Pentagon and also for the UK government to disclose some of this in this characterization of Putin as perhaps not very clear on reality, which is a pretty harsh assessment and perhaps a sensitive thing for someone who was a longtime KGB agent to hear, that the information he's relying on is not reliable, for example. President Biden also referenced what he said was unclear sort of assessments or reports about what appears to be Vladimir Putin's decision to put under house arrest some of his key advisors. I believe that's a reference to two FSB heads who were put under house arrest for perhaps either getting it wrong or for perhaps speaking truth to power. I mean, leading up to the invasion itself, you saw Vladimir Putin on television dress down one of his top intelligence advisors. There's a consequence to that when you don't have good support systems. And that's kind of what the Pentagon is describing here in a public way to embarrass Vladimir Putin.
DoD, Margaret, also estimates that about 20% of the Russian forces surrounding Kyiv have started to reposition. So is this a pullback or a shift in strategy?
Well, the president today said his personal belief is that it is not a pullback, that he has reason to believe that this might be essentially a head fake. And that they haven't seen a real pullback by Russian forces that would reflect the diplomatic language that Russia is throwing out there to say, you know, oh, we might be willing to have some real conversations with the Ukrainians in a different forum. President Biden said he's a skeptic and that he also isn't ready to believe that Vladimir Putin is scaling down his aspirations. In the past few days, you've heard, even seen on Russian television, descriptions of the special operation now being just about certain parts of Ukraine rather than the entirety of it. And that's one of the questions here is, does Vladimir Putin's military even have the ability to continue to carry out the operation that he wanted them to retake the country, in his view, or to invade fully Ukraine, including the western portions that are very pro-Europe and very anti-Russian? Or will he remain concentrated in the east, where he has come in through and up from the southeast as well, where you have Russian speakers and those who he thought would be more welcoming of the invasion. But you are still seeing stiff resistance there. So again, very hard to get inside the head of Vladimir Putin in that very small room where he makes his decisions with a very small number of advisors. But that is what U.S. intelligence is trying to do.
Well, if anyone can make inroads on the reporting, it's you. Margaret Brennan, thanks for being with us.